Thank you. What's the most common question on an Emory undergraduate student's mind? Is it, how come we don't have a football team? Or is it, who is Dooley? Or how about this one? Where do I see myself after graduation? Indeed, as a former Emory student, I was no stranger to this question. It's a question that I would often ruminate over during a late night of studying at the library, or a question that would creep up on an even later night with a couple friends at Maggie's. Where do I find myself after graduation? As famous physicist Niels Bohr once said, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Indeed, these predictions become even more challenging when we're asked about our own personal aspirations. In the field of data and analytics, there's an infatuation with being able to predict things. From companies like Netflix that are trying to predict which TV series you're bound to binge next, to companies like Target who have proven to be able to predict which of their customers are pregnant, the field of data and analytics have driven us all to become fortune tellers. One of the more popular predictive modeling techniques is called neural networks. Neural networks are loosely based off the central nervous system in which billions of neurons are interconnected, receive countless amounts of information, integrate that information, and send signals throughout the entire body. In a similar fashion, a neural network model receives countless amounts of data, processes that data, and generates predictions. A basic neural network model has three components. The first is the input layer. The input layer is then followed by multiple hidden layers, and then finally an output layer. The input layer is comprised of the initial data that's used to make the model. The hidden layers are where the magic or the deep learning happens. In these layers, various neurons or nodes process through countless permutations of the initial data to generate a network of probability weights. These weights are all then consolidated in the final output layer to generate that prediction. So for sake of example, let's say that we want to predict, should I go to Chick-fil-A? All right, it's a fairly basic example. You probably wouldn't use a neural network to answer that question. But your decision may weigh on certain factors, right? So A, how hungry are you? B, is the weather nice outside? Or C, what day of the week is it? Each of those factors may have a certain weight associated with it and may interact with one another to influence your overall likelihood of going to Chick-fil-A. So let's say that you're really hungry, but it's raining outside. Depending on the weight you attribute to the inconvenience of the weather will influence your overall likelihood of whether or not you go to Chick-fil-A. Now, maybe a little bit of rain is not going to get in between you and your waffle fries, right? But how about if it was snowing? Or how about this scenario? I'm sure this is something we could all relate to. Let's say you're really hungry, it's 70 degrees, and it's sunny outside. But you realize it's Sunday, right? In which case, the Chick-fil-A gods have already made that decision for you. In that permutation of the neural network, the amount of weight associated with the day of the week supersedes all the other factors, right? Because as we've all learned painstakingly, Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. The take-home point is that the neural network is able to generate multiple different probability weights, and those weights can all then be consolidated to come up with a projection of whether or not you're going to be having those waffle fries. So now that we have a very basic understanding of neural networks, I want to use this more as a metaphor to see if I could have used it to predict where I would have ended up after graduation. So in order to do this, let's go back 10 years when I was an Emory student and take a look at my neural network. What were my inputs? Well, I was a neuroscience and econ major. I was doing research in a neurology lab, and I was part of the pre-health mentoring club. All of my inputs may have predicted me to follow a path of medicine or clinical research. And yet, fast forward 10 years, those predictions would have been incorrect. So what happened? A closer look at the hidden layers of my neural network will actually point to clues about a passionate love affair that I began having with data and analytics. As we explore each of these hidden layers, I want to use the stages of dating as a framework to uncover how this love affair emerged and grew stronger over the past few years. So our first hidden layer is attraction. So this is when you first lay eyes on her, right? This is when your heart starts to beat a little faster and you get those butterflies in your stomach. Well, I remember when I got those butterflies. I was sitting over in Whitehall taking a class on econometrics, and our professor actually asked us to use a particular data set to predict the number of wins for a baseball team. And I remember thinking to myself, well, this is pretty cool. The fact that I could manipulate data on a computer screen and come up with these projections and these forecasts. So, as an avid basketball fan, the first thing I did when I went back to my dorm was I searched the internet for tons of basketball data, and I tried to prove to my friends who were Miami Heat fans at the time that my beloved Brooklyn Nets would be making the playoffs that year. Now, no amount of predictive modeling, aside from fabricating data, would have substantiated that claim. But that's besides the point, because my Nets are doing well now. The point is, the feeling that I got right before hitting run on a new model was almost like the dopamine rush that you would get when you pulled a lever on a slot machine in Vegas. I was hooked, and it was like love at first sight. That same semester, I remember researching tons of articles and reading things like data is the new oil, that 90% of all the data that's out there has been created in the past few years. And a Harvard Business Review article that called the data scientist one of the sexiest jobs of the 21st century. So with all this in mind, I started thinking to myself, how can we start to use data in healthcare? Which now brings us to hidden layer number 2, uncertainty. Now, this is the part of the relationship where you're still not sure if things are going to work out. For me, this period of uncertainty was in full swing after graduation. Like most freshly minted grads, I decided to embark on the infamous gap year. Now, like most millennials, my gap year involved me getting reacclimated to my high school bedroom of my parents' place back in Jersey. Now, while back at home, this feeling of uncertainty just grew, and I started to feel lost. I tried to reconcile my newfound love for data with my passion for the health sciences. On one side, I knew I was attracted to data, but on the other side, I guess I was scared to fully jump in. And so part of it may have been that I was scared of being rejected, or part of it could have been that I was scared of falling in love with something that was outside of the scope of what my parents had envisioned. Now, despite my fears, I decided to expand my network. And I remember that summer sending out hundreds of emails to professors and professionals in healthcare asking for their feedback and insight about data in healthcare. Partly due to the butterfly effect, I landed an internship at Emory Healthcare. And in my role, I quickly learned about the changing US healthcare landscape and some of the challenges that we faced. To depict some of these changes, our prior CEO at Emory Healthcare used an analogy of shifting from what's called World A to World B. World A was this predominant fee-for-service model of healthcare in which much of our output was driven by volume. World B embraced a new value-based approach to healthcare in which we would provide our patients with high-quality care at reasonable costs. Internally, we would refer to this as the tale of two worlds, because in many senses, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. While technological progress had led to brilliant innovation in things like medical procedures and pharmaceuticals, we'd actually found that hospital errors were the 8th leading cause of death in the United States, and that nearly a third of US expenditures were considered waste. And so although we had done a good job of identifying what to do to our patients, we had actually failed when it came to how we deliver that care appropriately, effectively, and equitably. And so while it seemed as though we were approaching the Enlightenment age, we were actually still stumbling in the dark. So armed with my newfound knowledge, knowing that we were transitioning towards value-based care, I was highly motivated, but still uncertain as to where and how data would play a role. Which now brings us to the Enlightenment stage. This is the stage of dating in when things start to click, right? You can start to envision yourself seeing with her long term, and the thought of introducing her to your parents may even pop up in your mind. Knowing now that we were transitioning towards value-based care, I had started to ask myself, well, how do we define value? Value for us was looking at things like quality, patient satisfaction, cost, process, all of which has data behind it. Historically, much of that data had been kept in silos. And so one of the first things that we did is we democratized that data. We made that data easily accessible to our frontline staff, clinicians, and decision makers. In doing so, we had also been able to develop tools where we could identify where there may be opportunities to reduce clinical variation across all of our hospitals. With data now at our fingertips, we were able to ask questions like, why is our length of stay for heart failure X amount of days at this hospital and Y amount of days at this hospital? Or why is the mortality rate for our septic patients X% here and Y% here? Now, the Enlightenment stage is where you also begin to accept each other's flaws. For me, this meant understanding that data by itself is not enough to induce change. As our chief medical officer likes to say, you cannot fatten a chicken simply by weighing it. In other words, data or measurement is necessary, but not sufficient. Truthfully, much of our success was driven by engaging and building relationships and trust with our clinicians and our frontline staff so that they were empowered to use that data to make the right decisions. And that's when it all started to click. While our clinicians were equipped with scalpels and stethoscopes, I was equipped with databases and software. Together, we were using data to save lives. All right, so now we've reached the fourth and final hidden layer, commitment. You can already see some of the guys getting nervous in the audience. This is your point in the relationship in which you may have made it through your first argument, right? You may have said the L word out loud, and you just noticed that she left her toothbrush at your place, right? And so now you're debating on whether or not you're going to put a ring on it. For me, commitment to data came in the form of teaching. There's a saying that the most successful marriages are where you fall in love multiple times, all with the same person. For me, teaching was able to do just that, fall in love with data over and over again. For me, there was no better feeling than to see some of my students have their aha light bulb moments in class as they were going through their own data discovery. Additionally, in a climate where it seems like more and more companies are using data questionably, I was inspired to teach and show people how data can be used for good, and in our cases, of how it could be used to better the lives of our patients and families. All right, so now that we've seen all my hidden layers of my neural network, let's go back to that original question. Where do I see myself after graduation? Truthfully, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have not have imagined saying that I would be using data to save lives, let alone being here at TEDx, giving a talk here at Emory. One of the most beautiful things about the human brain is its plasticity. That is, its ability to change shape over time as you acquire new knowledge through life experiences. Emory University's motto, which you see up here in Latin, translates to The wise heart seeks knowledge. With that in mind, I encourage you all to stimulate and nurture your intellectual curiosity, to expand your own neural networks, form new connections, and don't be afraid to fall in love. If there's one thing I've learned in life, is that some things are easy to predict and some things aren't. But what I've found is that the best things in life are often unpredictable. Thank you.